Welcome, everyone. Today, our journey takes us into the heart of Luxor's Valley of the Kings. We're focusing on one specific site, the tomb of Ramses VI. You might know it as KV9.
That's right, a really significant royal burial site.
Absolutely. It's packed with history, and we've gathered some great archaeological insights. We really want to explore what makes this ancient place tick, what its story is.
Definitely. And the Valley of the Kings itself, near ancient Thebes. Well, it's famous, isn't it? The final stop for so many New Kingdom pharaohs.
Right.
And while, ancient Greeks and Romans knew about some tombs, maybe 10, maybe 14 were accessible back then, it was really the big archaeological push in the 19th and 20th centuries that mapped out, 62 of them. And we're still finding more, like KV 63 and 64 relatively recently.
Wow, still more to find. And KV9, Ramses VI tomb, it wasn't unknown, was it? Giovanni Belzoni went in pretty early on, back in 1816.
He did, yes. A fairly cursory look, it seems. He mentioned finding a red granite sarcophagus in the burial chamber. Badly damaged, though.
Damaged how?
Well, the lid was gone, for starters. It was in rough shape.
Okay. And that sarcophagus, didn't it get moved?
It did. Much later, after the tomb was properly cleared in 1972, it was moved to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. It's been restored, and you can see it there now.
Ah, okay. So Belzoni saw it early, but the real work came later.
Exactly. And despite any, damage or disturbances over the millennia, we're quite certain it is Ramses VI's tomb. The evidence inside, the inscriptions, it points clearly to him.
Good. So we know who it belonged to. We know a bit about its rediscovery. Let's step inside. Architecturally speaking, what's the layout like?
Well, New Kingdom royal tombs, they have a sort of typical plan, but it evolved. By the early 19th dynasty, they started decorating more extensively, and that meant their traditional texts about the underworld, the pictures that went with them, they started moving them out of the burial chamber itself.
Move them where?
Into the entrance corridors, the halls you walk through first. You see that trend continuing in KV9. It's like they were putting more emphasis on guiding the spirit right from the moment it entered the tomb.
So how does that show up in the design? What would you actually see?
You notice a lot of sun imagery, very deliberate. It's all about the pharaoh's journey into the netherworld, the afterlife.
Like what kind of images?
Okay, so above the entrance, maybe a big yellow sun disk. Inside it, you might see Khepri, the scarab god, representing the rising sun, and Atum for the setting sun.
Right, sunrise and sunset.
Exactly. Then, as you go further in, over the doorways on the lintels, you'd find these winged red solar disks. Even the colors matter. Yellow bands on ceilings, on walls. Corridor ceilings often painted dark blue or black like the night sky with stars.
Stars, okay.
And these amazing vultures flying inwards toward the burial chamber. It's all designed to feel like you're following the sun on its journey.
It sounds incredibly symbolic, like a whole cosmic map laid out. What about the writing, the inscriptions?
The inscriptions on the side walls are interesting. They face outwards.
Outwards, meaning?
Meaning they read into the tomb as you walk along. It reinforces this theoretical east-west axis the tomb is built on.
That east-west thing again, that's the sun's path, right?
Precisely. Birth and rebirth in the east, death and the underworld in the west. The pharaoh's journey mirrors the sun's. And you also see lots of paired symbols for Lower and Upper Egypt. Often figures like the goddesses Isis and Nephthys representing that duality.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, something else that jumped out at me from the research, that those ramps cut into the floors. What were they for?
Yes, that's a great detail. In the upper corridors, B, C, D, E, and then again later in G and H, they actually cut ramps down into the floor at the end of each section.
Ramps? Why? To make it steeper. Sort
Sort of the opposite, actually. It increases the headroom. It creates more space between the floor and the ceiling, the soffit of the gateways between corridors.
More headroom.
Yeah.
Why would they need that specifically there?
Well, we see something a bit similar in Tutankhamun's tomb, KV 62. Its entrance lintel is cut back, slopes upwards. So the theory for KV9 is that these cuttings, both the ramps making the floor lower and maybe adjustments to the ceiling soffits, were needed to maneuver really large objects inside.
Like what? The sarcophagus?
Possibly, but more likely the big wooden shrine panels that would have been assembled around the sarcophagus in the burial chamber. We have that papyrus from Turin showing Ramses V's tomb.
Right, the famous map.
Yeah, and it clearly shows shrines enclosing the sarcophagus. So maybe Ramses VI era had something similar, and they realized, uh-oh, we need more vertical space to get these big panels through the corridors.
Fascinating. So the architecture had to adapt to the burial equipment. It gives you a real sense of the practical challenges they face.
It really does. These weren't just symbolic spaces, they had logistical requirements, too.
Okay, so moving from the structure to the decoration, let's talk about the art and the religious meaning.
Right. So on the ceilings in some of those corridors, D&E, and in the first big pillared hall, Hall F, you find scenes from the books of day and night.
The books of day and night, what are they about, basically?
They describe the sun god's journey, traveling through the underworld during the night, battling chaos, and then being reborn at dawn. Classic Egyptian stuff.
But you said these are on the ceilings, not like directly related to the burial chamber's main decoration.
In KV9, that seems to be the case. They're present, but perhaps not integrated with the burial chamber's decorative program in the same way as in some other tombs. It's a slight variation.
Interesting. Are there other standout religious scenes?
Definitely. If you go right to the back beyond the burial chamber, there's a small niche, K. On its rear wall, there's a really striking scene. It's a version of the final scene from the Book of Gates.
What does it show?
It shows the god Nun. He represents the primordial, watery chaos that existed before creation.
Okay.
And he's lifting the solar berg, the sun god's boat, up out of the darkness at dawn. A powerful image of rebirth.
Wow. And you mentioned graffiti there.
Yes, that particular wall is covered in later graffiti.
Yeah.
Lots of Greek, lots of Coptic script, visitors from centuries later leaving their mark.
A reminder that these places had long lives after the pharaohs. You also mentioned another nun figure.
That's right. Back in that first pillared hall, Hall F, on the rear wall, south side, there's another large figure of Nun lifting the sun bark.
Okay.
But what's odd there is this large diagonal break in the plaster, right where you might expect to find an ancient inspection note, graffiti left by the original work crews.
A break. Like damage.
It looks like it, but the plaster missing around the nun figure seems suspiciously neat. Almost too regular. It's led some to wonder if maybe parts of the decoration were deliberately removed later on.
Huh. Another little mystery. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Think about the Valley of the Kings overall. KV9 is in the Eastern Valley. What about the Western Valley?
Right. The Western Valley is geographically distinct. It's bigger, feels much more rugged, more desolate. The ancient Egyptians associate it with the goddess Meretseger, she who loves silence.
Fitting name. And there's still work going on out there, right? Like the Tazrit Temple project. Does that work tell us anything relevant to KV9, even though it's in the other valley?
Well, yes, indirectly. The University of Arizona project on Tazret Temple, ongoing since 2004, has found it was much closer to completion than previously thought.
Tazrit. She was a queen who ruled as pharaoh, end of the 19th dynasty.
Exactly. So understanding the scale of her projects, her power, helps us understand the whole period, the transition into the 20th dynasty when Ramses VI ruled. It gives context to the resources available, the political climate, that sort of thing.
I see. And other big research projects.
The Amenhotep III mapping project, MAP, especially their later work in the late 90s, really focused on Ramesside tombs, including in the Eastern Valley.
And what did they find?
Their work really confirmed the importance of those symbolic east-west axes we talked about in KV9. And they helped clarify differences in style and architecture between the 19th and 20th dynasties. So that wider research helps us place KV9 more accurately within its historical moment.
Makes sense. Context is everything. Now, one last detail. There is a suggestion this tomb might not have originally been for Ramses VI, maybe for Ramses VIII.
Ah, yes. That theory is out there. The idea is it might have been started for Ramses VIII, perhaps when he was still a prince.
Based on what?
It partly comes from how some scholars interpret comments written on a dedication text found inside the tomb.
But it's just a theory.
It's definitely still just a possibility being discussed. The main weight of evidence, the inscriptions, the overall context, still points very strongly to Ramses VI as the intended owner and the one ultimately buried there. But it's an interesting wrinkle.
It shows there are still questions, doesn't it? So as we wrap up our look at KV9, what are the main things you think people should take away?
Well, I think KV9 is a fantastic example of a 20th dynasty royal tomb. It shows us so much about their beliefs, the importance of the sun's journey, the path to the afterlife. The architecture with those ramps and the solar alignment is fascinating.
And the art, too.
Absolutely. The books of day and night, those striking images of Nun. They tell a story about rebirth and eternity that was clearly central to their worldview. It's a really rich site.
And it highlights how important the ongoing work in the valley is. These projects keep adding layers to our understanding, don't they?
They absolutely do. We're constantly refining the picture. New discoveries, reinterpretations, they could change how we see things, even in well-known tombs like this one.
It certainly makes you think.
Indeed. And maybe that's the final thought for everyone listening. When you consider how much tomb design and decoration evolved just within the New Kingdom, adapting to beliefs and perhaps even practical needs, what completely unexpected things might future discoveries tell us about how the ancient Egyptians truly conceived of death and the journey beyond? It keeps the whole field exciting.